What's up, everybody? I'm Abatage, and welcome to a bit of an update for the start of April 2022. It's been a busy couple of months, so I haven't been able to organise anything else at this stage, but at the moment, let's just have a quick look at the standings and some of the releases. We're going to go through them by score. So we're going to start with the lowest scoring released and head our way up to the top, and then have a quick look at the leaderboard and see what's coming up in the future. Because there are some interesting things to look at and some encouraging things as well for anyone who might be feeling like they're a bit behind in the start of this year. But let's kick it off where it hurts at the lowest scoring game of the year, which was Life is Strange Remastered Collection. 63 on OpenCritic, -7 Fantasy Critic score for Ashapurna Interactive. That one is a bit of a blow for that publisher to start off the year, especially as a game that I would have expected to at least score some positive numbers. However, coming a close second at the bottom is Chocobo GP, which got a 66 on OpenCritic. That's a -4 on Fantasy Critic from Scissormoon Softworks. Unfortunately, this is the only game so far that Scissormoon Softworks has had released, so that means their overall score is on -4, which is kind of a shame, especially because this was a pickup game that came in after the draft. But we're into positive numbers now, thanks to Shadow Warrior 3 for Beatmasters, which got a 73 on OpenCritic, which is a +3 on Fantasy Critic. Not bad, not bad. Similarly, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin also got a 73 from OpenCritic with a +3 on Fantasy Critic for Frozen Frog. Both Beatmasters and Frozen Frog have had a number of releases so far this year, so it's interesting to keep an eye on what they're doing. Recently, a Memoir Blue was released for Ashapurna Interactive, giving them a +4 points on Fantasy Critic after scoring 74 on OpenCritic, which I feel is a bit of a harsh score. I played through a Memoir Blue the other day, and while it's short and artsy, I really enjoyed it. It was a fantastic little bit of storytelling, and, I recommend checking it out. It's on Game Pass and all that, so, there's a little plug for that one. Coming up after them, though, is Dying Light 2 Stay Human, one of the first ones we saw released this year. That was published by Bog Creations LLC. It scored a 76, which is not terrible, with a +6 on Fantasy Critic. Similarly, Ghostwire Tokyo came out recently from my publisher, Ubisoft. I'm heartbroken to see it only got a 76, which is a +6, of course. It's a game that I haven't been able to play yet because I don't have the hardware for it. I don't have a PS5 and I don't have the right graphics card, but my goodness, it's one of the ones I'm so looking forward to playing, regardless of the middling kind of scores. Just above that, with a OpenCritic score of 77, that's a Fantasy Critic score of 7, is Weird West for Bog Creations LLC, keeping them kind of in this low to mid area of the map. Although Bog Creations LLC have probably got what I would say are the most releases so far this year. So it's interesting to see where they end up in the grand scheme of things. Equaling that, however, is Windjammers 2 for Beatmasters, which also got a 77 on OpenCritic, and that's a 7 for Fantasy Critic. With a 79 on OpenCritic and a 9 on Fantasy Critic, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands brought in some more points for Bog Creations LLC. That's another one of their many releases. And in the middle of the pack so far are a bunch of 80s. The first 80 we've got, which brings in 10 points for Fantasy Critic, is Far Changing Tides from my publisher Ubisoft. Again, another game I've played from this year, and it is fantastic. If you played the first one, this one's the same but better, which, sometimes is all you want from a sequel to a really good game. Just want more of the same, but better. And that's what Far Changing Tides was, for me anyway, as a player. The next 80 on OpenCritic, which is, of course, another 10 for Fantasy Critic, was Gunfault Chronicles Luminous Avengers IX2, or however you're meant to say it, who knows, for Frozen Frog, bumping them up another bit. Nobody Saves the World also got an 80. That's a 10 on Fantasy Critic, for Funky Face Studios, our reigning champion with their first entry for the year, being a solid 80. Can't really complain about that. Similarly, Ashapurna Interactive's final release for the year so far was Sifu, which earned 80 on OpenCritic, that's 10 on Fantasy Critic, bringing that publisher to a total score of 7, which might not sound like much, but at least they've been able to counteract that negative score from the very beginning from Life is Strange. Frozen Frog comes up next with the King of Fighters 15 for an 81. That's 11 on Fantasy Critic. Right behind Bog Creations LLC with another of their titles, Atelier Sophie 2, which got them 13 points on Fantasy Critic thanks to an 83 Open Critic score. Then we get the only release so far for Ample Studios, Pokemon Legends Arceus, or however you want to say it. It received an 83 on Open Critic, bringing them 13 points. However, thanks to their counterpick of Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster, their total points end up being a -3 so far for the year. That counterpick kind of hurt. Another publisher with only a single entry so far for the year is Noise Labs, who had Triangle Strategy come in for another 83 on OpenCritic. That's 13 total for that publisher so far, which is a great start for a publisher with only one title released. Similarly, Toys for Rodney has Kirby and the Forgotten Land as their only release so far, but it received an 85 on OpenCritic, giving them 15 points to kick off their season. Just like the final entry for Bog Creations LLC so far, which earned 85 on OpenCritic and added 15 to their currently soaring total, Ollie World brought their overall score up to 50 points so far. However, there's still not the highest scoring, as Penguin Publishing Limited came out with their only game so far, which was that Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster for 86 on OpenCritic, 16 points on Fantasy Critic, and that's where they're sitting right now as they wait for more releases down the track. Just like General Goods, who are sitting on 16 points on Fantasy Critic thanks to an 86 for Total War Warhammer 3, another early release that was very promising for that publisher to kick off their year. The second and final release for Funky Face Studios so far has been Tunic, which has brought in 16 points with an 86 on OpenCritic. Another game I've been playing and enjoying. It's currently our game of the month on How Long to Beat, so by all means please check it out. It's a fantastic little game, very challenging actually, surprisingly challenging compared with the cutesy art style and how it might look, but actually it's really involved and there's a lot of cool stuff in there. Which brings us to Tommysoft, who has 17 points on Fantasy Critic for Gran Turismo 7 after it received an 87 on OpenCritic. However, so far this publisher only has 11 points thanks to counterpicking Ghostwire Tokyo, which brought them a negative score. And we make it to the top 3 games released so far this year, with my publisher Ubisoft in third place thanks to Uncharted Legacy of Thieves, receiving a very strong 88. That's 18 points to start off, and that leaves my publisher with a total of 34 so far, which still put me ahead of Beatmasters overall, who earned a fantastic 19 points thanks to Horizon Forbidden West, which got an 89 on OpenCritic. However, their publisher has a total of 29 at the moment thanks to some lower scores in their roster. And of course, to no one's surprise, the highest scoring game so far this year is Elden Ring, which earned a whopping 95 points on OpenCritic. That's 31 on Fantasy Critic, and of course that's published by Frozen Frog, bringing their total to 49. And of course, let's not forget Pokeon Paw and Koei Rikmo, who have so far had nothing published, and they're both sitting on zeros. So let's have a quick look at the leaderboard before we wrap this up. What I find interesting about this leaderboard and encouraging about how things have turned out so far this year is that there's a direct correlation between released games and score, for the most part. As you can see, Jordan is playing with Bog Creations LLC has had the most games released so far, with 5 releases that has brought them up to the top of the leaderboard. The next one down, Frozen Frog, has had 4 releases. Then it followed by me, who's had 3 releases, and Beatmasters, who've also had 3, and so on and so forth. And apart from a couple of outliers that have suffered from some bad counterpicks, you can see that for the most part on the leaderboard, position is dictated by how many releases there have been, which is a fantastic stat because it shows that anyone can still win this game once their releases actually come out and get scores. So even if someone has had 0 releases so far, once you've had 5, you might find you've got more score than Bog Creations currently does at the top of the board. Of course, we never know what those scores are going to be, so who knows where we'll end up by the end of the year. Before we're done though, I'd just like to highlight that if you go to your account settings, which is under Manage Account under your username in the top right corner of the site, and go to the email tab, You can now tick a box that will sign you up to receive an email notification of public bids for your league when they are released. This saves you the trouble of having to log into the site and check bids on your own time and having to remember to do that, as new bids will get sent to you when they are revealed on the site anyway. That way you can check them and see if you want to actually make a counter bid or something like that without having to go to the trouble of, remembering and then going to the site to check it out. But that about does it for this little update at the beginning of April. I hope it's informative, and I look forward to seeing what will come out next and what kind of scores will shake up this leaderboard with new releases and that sort of thing. And I look forward to actually being a bit more organized and having some people on to have a chat about their league and their own publisher. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you in the future. Goodbye.